Hi, today we'll cover chapter 16, the digestive system. So let's begin with what is digestion and are there different types of digestion? Okay, so let's cover just that first question. What is the digestive system and what is its definition? All right, so to digest something is to actually break it down. And we can do that in several ways. So let's talk about first just plain old digestion. It's the breakdown of food, and we can do it in several ways. We can do it mechanically or we can do it chemically. All right. So we have a whole system whose goal is to take the food you eat and to cut it up into little pieces into what's called nutrients, small enough so we can absorb it into the bloodstream and carry those nutrients around the body to where it's needed. All right. Now there's different ways we can digest food. We can do it mechanically. And that would be just, a physical breaking apart the food, right? So we have our teeth, we have motility all along our digestive system. Like in our stomach, it's going to churn it and move it about that way and just, physically, mechanically break it down. The second way is through chemical digestion, and this is through the use of enzymes. So if you recall, enzymes are like chemical scissors that can actually cut um, larger molecules into smaller molecules. All right, but it does it through chemical means. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the digestive system. Okay, so we'll do the anatomy. The digestive system is divided into two parts. Okay, there is what we call the alimentary canal, or sometimes called the GI or gastrointestinal tract. And then we have what's called accessory organs. Accessory organs are those that aren't actually part of the digest or the alimentary canal, but feed into it. So think of the alimentary canal as just a tube. It's a long tube, open on both ends, right? It's open at the mouth and it's open at the anus. Okay, so that's the tube, that's the alimentary canal. Accessory organs feed into that. They're not part of the tube, but they feed secretions into the tube. So let's take a peek at what that might look like. And then the second part, okay. Then the next question is actually, what are the parts of the alimentary canal, okay, of that tube? And maybe like what how long is it? How long is that tube? What are we talking about? Okay, so here's the tube starting at the mouth all the way to the anus. Okay, so if you were to guess how long that is, what would you say? And I'll tell you, so it's about almost 30 feet. So 30 feet of tube. And then, of course, we have all these things that feed into it, which we'll talk about it. So let's start with just naming the parts of the alimentary canal. What are all these um, structures along that tube? All right. So let me post it here. Okay. You can follow along, but I'm going to go on along the picture. So we have the mouth, okay, to the pharynx, back here to the throat, to the esophagus, to the stomach. All right. Then from the stomach, we have the small intestines, to the large intestines, to the rectum and the anus. Okay. Maybe let's go ahead and draw that. I think we should draw that. All right, so let's go ahead and draw this. All right, so let's do the alimentary canal. All right, so we'll start at the mouth here. right? I should actually say the oral cavity here. And then we get to the throat, the pharynx, okay, which is the back of the mouth. And then that leads into the esophagus. The esophagus will pass through the thorax, the thoracic, and then lead into this J-shaped organ called the stomach. We'll draw the stomach later in more detail. All right. So I'll label this after, but draw along with me. I hope you draw along with me, right? There's something that happens as you draw it. It helps to solidify in your memory, right? All right, then from here, we have the small intestine. Now, the small intestine is about 20 feet of that, 20 feet of the alimentary canal. So it's the majority of that. So we have to break it up into different parts. The small intestine is made up of 3 parts. And so imagine 20 feet. I'm not going to draw 20 feet and I'm not going to, so it twists and turns, right, folds, and I'm going to make it very simple like this, but maybe I'll put a little break here knowing that, okay, it's much longer than that. So there are 3 parts to the small intestine. I'm going to, well, I'll label it again. And then we get to the large intestine. The large intestine is made up of different parts, but it is wider, not longer, but wider, right? Comes up, it moves across. It actually goes, well, I'm going to put it over here. So moves across and then comes down like this. And it travels along the kind of the outside of the abdomen or along the edges of the abdomen, comes down like this. Then it makes this turn like this, and then ends in the rectum, and then the anal canal and the anus. Okay, so let's label it. We have the oral cavity, the mouth and oral cavity. We have the pharynx. And I may or may not have stressed it's pharynx, Y and X. It's not pharynx. That's very common. People want to say pharynx, but it's pharynx. Then we have the esophagus. Then we have the stomach. Okay. And then we get to the small intestine. So the stomach ends around here. And then we have the small intestine. So I'm going to do this and say small intestine. And it's made up of 3 parts. The first part is very short, called the duodenum or duodenum. It's less than 1 foot. Okay, so it's just really this C-shaped part is the duodenum. Then we have the longer jejunum, which is approximately 9 feet. And then we have lastly the ileum, which is approximately 11 feet. Okay. Notice the ileum, I-L-E-U-M, and I stress this a lot in all my classes, that spelling matters, okay? Spelling matters. So as you're taking this class, really, do your best in making sure your spelling is precise, all right? Because, for the most part, it's not going to make a difference in somebody's life, but there are places where it might, right? So ILIUM is a bone. It's part of the pelvis, right? ILEUM is part of the small intestine. 2 completely different structures, okay, systems, but they sound the same, ileum and ileum. And so you as a, someone who records things, it needs to be precise, right, in medicine, because it could make a difference in what you do. All right. So those are the three parts of the small intestine. Then we come to this junction here. There's a junction here between the small and the large intestine. The large intestine is made up of different parts. Okay. Oh, I'm going to add here. So this is the appendix. The appendix hangs off of the beginning of the large intestine. The beginning of the large intestine is called the cecum. So here I'm going to say large intestine, but that is made up of different parts. And it begins here with the cecum, this pouch, blind-ended pouch. Then we move up. So this is called the ascending colon. Then we're going to turn and come across to the transverse colon. And then we make another 90-degree turn and come down to the descending colon. And then lastly, there's this little S-shaped curve we call the sigmoid colon. Okay. After that, then we get the rectum and then the anus. Okay. All right. So when someone goes to have a colonoscopy, okay, they're going to put the little camera up the anus and then travel the length of the colon. Now, colon often is used synonymously with large intestine because the majority of the large intestine is colon, but not all of it, right? There's a cecum, that's not colon. If you get a sigmoidoscopy, they're only going to take the camera up and look at the sigmoid colon, right? So these terms are important to understand. Okay, so that's our the flow chart kind of, but to be able to draw it is very helpful. All right, let me share my screen again. All right, let's talk about the layers of the wall, okay? So when we look at the digestive system, there's a lot happening there, right? You have to break down all of your food and not only break it down, but then you have to absorb it across the wall. And so the wall of the digestive system is very important. So there are different layers to the wall. And let me list those. There are 4 layers. And I'll show a picture after. So there's the mucosa. Now we're going from, I should write this here. This is deep to superficial. So we're kind of starting on the inside, the lumen, which is the space on the inside, and then we're moving superficially to the outside. So the mucosa lines the space. It's made up of simple columnar epithelium. Okay. Underneath that submucosa, so it's kind of, when I describe it, the submucosa is under the mucosa. It's deep to the mucosa, but it actually is superficial to the mucosa as we go superficially to the outside, right? The sub would imply underneath it. It is if you're sitting from the inside looking out, okay? But in anatomical language, the submucosa is actually superficial. Sorry, that was probably confusing. All right, but it's connective tissue. So usually there's an epithelial layer and then there's a connective tissue layer to connect it to the rest of the body. All right, so connective tissue, there's blood vessels in there. Muscularis is next, which is smooth muscle, okay? And there's several layers, circular muscle, longitudinal muscles. And then serosa is the peritoneum, okay? And connective tissue, epithelial tissue, but it's this layer of serous membrane that sits on top. Maybe we should draw it, okay? So, because I felt that was a little confusing to describe it. So let's take a look at the layers of the um, wall. Okay, so the lumen would be in the inside. Okay, so this is the space lumen. Okay, then we have the epithelial lining. Okay, this is the mucosa. Then we have the submucosa. Then we have the muscularis. And then we have the serosa. So serosa, think serous membrane, maybe. All right, so let's start here. Here's the muscularis. Then we have the muscular, sorry, mucosa. Mucosa, the submucosa. Then we have the muscularis. Now the muscularis is composed of what we call the circular muscles. Um, and then the longitudinal muscles. Maybe I'll explain that in just a moment. All right, muscularis is smooth muscle. Okay, and then the outer layer superficially is the serosa, which is the peritoneum. So remember the serous membranes. We have serous membranes surrounding the heart, surrounding the lungs, and then found within the abdominal pelvic cavity. So we'll talk next about kind of how those are organized. Let's take a quick look. So if we look at a different view of the alimentary canal or part of it, right? So we're looking, here's the lumen on the inside, right? The muscularis layer has circular muscles. The circular muscles go around, like this, right? So they go around like a circle around the tube. The longitudinal muscles, a different layer, has fibers that run this way, right? So what happens is, you think we're talking like, 30 feet that food has to move along to get to the anus, right? And, people lie down, people stand on their head and they still can poop, right? That means stuff is still moving. And it's because of these muscles. You have circular muscles that squeeze the food along, and then you have longitudinal that push it along. So we have contractions of this and this occurring, in a very organized way. They call it peristalsis, this rhythmic contraction of these muscles, smooth muscles that squeeze the material along. All right. So important. Now, there's some exceptions to this. There's a place in the stomach. Well, there's a stomach that has an extra layer to move, material around. All right, so I hope that's clear. Now let's go back to um, the rest of that question. Well, actually, while I'm here, um, if we look at the abdominal pelvic cavity, so here's the abdominal pelvic cavity, and we have the diaphragm, which is located here, right? So here's the thoracic cavity, right? Where the lungs and the heart is. So the pericardium, the pleura is located up here. Lining the abdominal pelvic cavity is the serous membrane called the peritoneum. And so the peritoneum lines the cavity like this, but it's a little more complex in the abdomen because there's more than one organ, right? The heart, there's just the heart, and then there's the lungs. So there's one organ, you know, for each of the other serous membranes. So this is peritoneum. but this is the one part that's lining the cavity, so we call it the parietal peritoneum, right? So what do we have here? We have a liver here. We have a stomach over here, right? And we have intestines, we have all kinds of stuff. So it's going to get complicated because this one membrane is going to have to encompass a lot of these structures. And then there are structures that are outside of the peritoneum. Okay, and I should have drawn it. So there's structures that are, not inside the peritoneum. All right, so how do we do this? So we have the peritoneum coming here and does this, and it's going to go around the organ like this. Now, if it was one organ like the heart, it would be simple. It would be closed here, and then we'd have a parietal layer and a visceral peritoneum, and then the peritoneal cavity like this. So, but it's complex because we have other organs. So how do we deal with that? So there's these areas where the peritoneum is going to come together and then go around another structure like that. And then when we have a lot of them, like intestines, looping and looping, right? We have to have peritoneum go around like this. Okay. So I should put it like this, like that. So it does get complicated, right? And there's actually there's a part that comes down like this. Anyway, so there's the parietal peritoneum, and then we have the visceral peritoneum. That is surrounding the organs, but it's part of the same, membrane, right? It's just where it's located. And then all the space here, this is the peritoneal cavity. Right? And there's things that happen in the peritoneal cavity. This is outside of the peritoneal cavity, what, sometimes we call retroperitoneal, in back of it or, outside of it. Now there are these areas here where the peritoneum comes together and forms multiple layers. Okay. They have special names, and I think the question is asking where is the mesentery and the omentum. Okay. There's different omentum. There's the omentum that hangs off the stomach. This is called the greater omentum. Omentum. Think of momentum, but without the M. So it's omentum. And then over here is the lesser omentum. Okay. So it's all peritoneum, but one is between the liver and the stomach, and the other hangs off the stomach. Here's some more peritoneum, but it's not called an omentum. We call this the mesentery. Sometimes called mesentery proper, but mesentery. That's between the small intestines. So these are the loops of the small intestine. Okay, so you can see how complicated it is. And so whenever there's surgery in the abdomen, all right, there's a lot to that goes on there. And so you'll be reading um, reports, orders, things like that, I think, and needing to understand what it is that is happening. And so the mesentery is the peritoneum that surrounds the small intestines, and it kind of keeps it in order. And I'll show you a picture. All right. I hope that helps a little. And I hope you're seeing the value of drawing it out. Okay, so if you're just watching and not doing the drawing, I would encourage you to draw as I draw. Okay, even if you don't want to put it in your notes or anything, but just to do that practice. Again, there's something that happens as you draw. And just to clarify, versus just looking at a picture, and even if I were to describe it, it doesn't it doesn't, it's harder to understand just by looking at a picture. So, all right, let's go ahead and go back to our study guide. Okay, and let's see. I'm going to describe now the mesentery and the omentum. And then I'll give you a picture too. Okay, so mesentery, some call it an organ. It's, with any of the serous membranes, it's both connective tissue and epithelial tissue. It's peritoneum and encloses and anchors digestive organs. I'm going to put small intestines or intestines because there's large intestines also, to the posterior abdominal wall. Omentum, okay, and the description is here, lesser between the liver and I'll just say stomach. So we haven't gotten to the parts of the stomach. Oh, I'll leave it here. Lesser curvature of stomach. And then greater curvature of stomach and transverse colon. Okay. Because when I did that picture, if we go back to this, okay, that I didn't show you where this ended. So this actually comes down like a big skirt and then goes up again and attaches to the transverse colon that's going across. All right, so it comes down and up. So those are the attachment points for the greater omentum. Okay, here's a picture of that, the layers of the intestines. Okay, there's the see how. Okay, so this is the small intestine. Here's the mesentery going around it, right? We have the mucosa. We have the submucosa. We have the muscularis, the circular and longitudinal muscles, and we can see the fibers running around and running the length here. And then the serosa. The serosa is just part of that peritoneum. Remember? All right. Hopefully that's helpful. Now let's take a look. I have one more picture, kind of showing you the organization here. Okay, of the this is, yeah, like a side view. Okay, like someone taking a sagittal section and then looking into that side, or I mean, yeah, sagittal section. So here's the stomach, and then the greater omentum hangs off of here, and here's the transverse colon back there. All right. Here's the mesentery here around the small intestines. Here's that greater omentum as it hangs down the off the stomach, creating a skirt-like structure. And then the lesser omentum here is between the liver and the stomach. All right. Interesting, I hope. All right, let's go on to the teeth. How many teeth in a child and then in an adult? We call the child, children's teeth deciduous. If you think of a tree, a deciduous tree is a tree that loses its leaves in the winter. All right, so child's teeth are deciduous. They're going to be lost and replaced by permanent teeth later. Okay, so this is the teeth here of a child and an adult. Um, I'm going to make it small so it fits. So 20 child teeth and 32 adult. They are numbered in the adult mouth, and in the child mouth, it's lettered. Okay. And this table, which is in your book, tells you the names. Okay. So we have incisors in the front, we have canines, we have premolars, and then we have molars. All right. Here's another view of teeth with other structures. Okay. All right. Here they are. Um, Salivary glands. Oh, and this one we can see some tonsils, which are nice. Lingual tonsils, the palatine tonsils on either side, and then we don't see the pharyngeal tonsils, which is in the back of the nasopharynx. Okay, let's talk about salivary glands. So we have three different salivary glands. Okay. Um, And of course, they make saliva, which help to lubricate, moisten the food. There is some chemical digestion that begins in the mouth because of an enzyme found in the saliva called amylase. Amylase breaks down starches. So, if you eat starchy food, the amylase, you have an enzyme that begins the chemical digestion. All right. There's three glands, the parotid glands. Okay, the parotid glands are located here, kind of superficially here, right in front of your ear. They're the biggest ones. You could squeeze them and have saliva shoot into your mouth. Yeah, see, I can feel saliva going in there. All right, so let me show you a picture. Okay, so those are the parotid glands. Where would you find the submandibular gland? Right? Again, don't memorize if you don't need to. Understand it. Sub is under, mandible is the mandibles, right? So here's the mandible. Oh, sorry. No, that's not mandible. Here's the mandible here. So underneath the mandible here are the submandibular salivary glands. Right here. These are the gleeking glands. They shoot a stream of saliva. Where's the so there is a little duct here. There's a submandibular duct that empties into under the tongue. Okay. And so this one is a single duct and it can shoot spit out from under your tongue. Some people can do it on command. I can't. And then there's the parotid duct that actually just takes saliva right into your mouth. And then there's the sublingual glands, which is lingual means tongue. So this is under the tongue. Okay, so lingual means tongue. And it's got a lot of little ducts that just ooze the saliva out under the tongue. Okay. All right, let's take a look at the stomach. It says draw the stomach. So of course we are going to draw it, and then I will post a picture of it after we draw it. And then there's some questions about glands there. So let's draw our stomach. Okay. So we have the esophagus that drops food down into the stomach. So there is a control mechanism there between the esophagus and the stomach. So the stomach is a J-shaped organ. We do have a circular muscle here. Maybe I'll put it in red. Okay, called the sphincter. So this is the gastroesophageal sphincter. All right, and so it just regulates you know, food entering into the stomach. All right. This area here is called the fundus. Fundus is this region that kind of comes up. In the uterus, we have a fundus too that moves upward. It means to pour, so I'm not really sure about how that came to be. We have the body of the stomach here. I'm going to open the stomach up because we're going to look at structures within it also. So this is the body of the stomach, right? This is called the lesser curvature. This is where the lesser omentum attaches. And then over here would be the greater curvature. Okay. This region here is called the pylorus. Pylorus means gatekeeper. And then we have another sphincter muscle, a circular muscle here called the pyloric sphincter. Okay, which is going to regulate what exits and then of course after that we get that C-shaped duodenum, which is the beginning of the small intestine. Inside the stomach, we see that it's got ridges in there. These ridges are called rugae or gastric folds. Okay, they create surface area, but also they allow expansion of the stomach. Okay, sometimes, in a cadaver, we'll open up a cadaver stomach and find it very smooth in there. So the stomach was actually full and stretched out upon death. All right, and then maybe I should label my esophagus, which is not part of the stomach, but it leads into the stomach. Okay, notice there are circular muscles, right? There's in the muscularis layer. There's longitudinal muscles. But as I mentioned earlier, there's an extra muscle here called an oblique muscle, which is diagonal. Okay, so these are the muscles. Smooth muscle, the muscularis, which is made up of circular. I'm going to MM as muscles, longitudinal, and then a third layer, the obliques muscle layer. Okay, so that's a little unique in the stomach. All right, let's go back to our, okay, and then I'm going to include a picture here. And then we can take a look at the wall. Okay, so this is looking at the stomach wall, and we'll notice a couple things here, which leads us kind of into the next. Well, let's see, did we answer all the questions? Body, greater curvature, lesser curvature, rugae, pyloric sphincter. How many muscle layers are there? There are 3, right? The circular, smooth, longitudinal, and oblique. All right. Let's go to now the lining of the stomach. So within the stomach wall, there are specialized cells and glands that secrete, different things. So we can see here the gastric glands that come down, and it's made up of different types of cells. So the different types of cells, there are I say three, but I also include a fourth one actually, but you're responsible for three. Three types of secretory cells, the chief cells, the parietal cells, and the mucus cells. Okay, chief cells secrete something called pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is a kind of a precursor enzyme that is converted into something called pepsin. Pepsin is the enzyme and it digests protein. Parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid, which makes the contents, the gastric juices in the stomach, acidic. Hydrochloric acid has a pH of 1, all right? And, it kills pretty much everything that comes in, almost. Kills the bacteria, so when you eat that food that's been sitting out a little too long, right? Hopefully your stomach acids, your parietal cells will secrete enough hydrochloric acid to kill everything. And there's something called intrinsic factor that's also secreted. I'm not sure if I'll ask that, but definitely hydrochloric acid. But know that, in case you read about it or something, it helps with vitamin B absorption. Mucus cells, also called goblet cells, secrete mucus, and it helps to lubricate, protect the stomach lining also. I included this last one, endocrine cells. I think they call them endocrine cells. I think they call, yeah, let me see the picture from the book. They might call it endocrine cells. But anyway, they secrete lots of other hormones that are important in digestion, motility, movement of the stomach, in churning, controlling hunger and things like that. Okay, so this is, the gastric gland here, and then, some of the different cells. All right, and that all contributes toward that gastric juice. Okay, I'm looking for if I added a question. So maybe here I'll talk a little bit. Let me add here. It's not a question on your study guide, but I want to put it here. An ulcer, because I think it's important. What causes a peptic ulcer? So peptic refers to the stomach. So in the past, it was believed that, the more acid you produce, hydrochloric acid, then, it eats away at the lining of the stomach. Certainly that can happen. And so, how do you control or how do you treat a peptic ulcer? Is they used to just give medication that prevents or decreases the secretion of hydrochloric acid. Okay, and then control your diet and stress, things like that. That can all make you produce more hydrochloric acid. But in the 1980s, so not that long ago, a physician actually, and a researcher noticed that, wow, there's this one bacteria um, that is found in a lot of ulcers. Now, is that a coincidence, or could it possibly be that this bacteria is causing ulcers, peptic ulcers? So they could not formulate a model, an animal model that would be able to, use the animal to explain this. So whatever they tried didn't work with different animals. And so what they did is they drank a sample of this bacteria, and the bacteria is called H. pylori. So that's the bacteria. And lo and behold, soon after, both of them developed ulcers. Okay. And well, maybe I won't underline it. I'll like okay, so H. pylori is the name of the bacteria. Helicobacter pylori. And so they both got ulcers. And then they took antibiotics and the ulcers went away. So this was really big. In fact, it was so big, right, in the treatment of peptic ulcers that, all you had to do was take antibiotics. And so they found that about 80% of peptic ulcers were caused by this bacteria. Not all of them, but the majority of them. And so it changed the way people treated peptic ulcers. And, which was simple, which was to take antibiotics, and that would help. And they ended up winning the Nobel Prize for medicine. So, let's see. So this is just kind of an interesting thing. H. pylori causes the majority of peptic ulcers, right? Because there's ulcers other places in the body. Peptic ulcers. And the treatment is antibiotics. Okay, and so the researcher's name was, the physician's name was Dr. Barry Marshall. And then he did have an assistant. Oh, no, it was a pathologist that he worked with. All right, anyway, kind of fun things, interesting things. I'm going to make this kind of small. All right, next question. Let's move on to the small intestine. The small intestine comes right after the stomach, right? We already know there's 3 parts. And what happens here? So duodenum, jejunum, ileum, ileum. And what happens here? Most of the digestion, that's why it's so long, because you have to not only digest all the food, majority of the food, but then you have to absorb it. Okay, so you need the length of the small intestine to do both of those things. There's a lot of surface area in the small intestine. I'm going to show you that. It is a surface area machine. Okay, so if we compare, the surface area of a tube. Okay, so if it was just a tube, okay, it would have a certain amount of surface area. But no, we find that when we look, actually, let me draw this. We can come back to this and we can look at this picture. I think I draw it better. All right, so if we look at a tube like this, okay, there'd be a certain amount of surface area for which to absorb all the nutrients. Okay, but when we look closely, we actually see that there are ridges. Okay, these ridges are called circular folds. The circular folds increase surface area 3 times more than if it was just a tube. All right. But wait, it gets better. If we look at a circular fold, we find that on the circular fold, there are folds on the circular folds. So folds upon folds. Each one of these folds is called a villus. Villi for plural, sorry about that. So villi for plural. Okay, so we have the circular folds here. Another name for circular folds are plicae. Circularis. All right, so these are the same thing as circular folds, plicae. They might just call plicae. All right, villi increase surface area by 8 more times or 10 more times. Okay, a lot more. And you can see why. It makes more sense. But wait, there's more. Upon each villi, there are tiny hair-like structures called microvilli. And this will increase the surface area by another, I think it's 20 times. But anyway, you get the point. It's going to increase surface area a lot. And these numbers may be not quite right. But The surface area is crazy. And then, we've got many feet of this happening. So its function is to absorb. And, a disease, chronic diseases that affect the small intestine, we could see that would affect the ability to absorb nutrients. So, all right, let's take a look. Did it give me numbers? Okay, nah, but we could see, here's a villus singular, and then on top of them we have microvilli. All right, let's move on and talk about some accessory organs. So now, maybe we should do the large intestine first. I should have put that first. Um, well, let's do it in order. So let's look at some accessory organs that um, feed into the alimentary canal. We've talked about the salivary glands already. Okay. The others feed into the small intestine. That's why I put it here, is because these are going to feed in there. The liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. The liver produces bile, and bile is important in fat digestion. It breaks up the fat. The gallbladder stores the bile, and then the pancreas is going to make digestive enzymes. Now, in the endocrine system, we learned that it secretes insulin and glucagon that controls blood glucose, but that's its endocrine function. This is an exocrine function, which means that it's going to deliver digestive enzymes through a duct into the small intestine. I'm going to draw what that looks like. This is kind of a fun thing to draw. Okay. And where that actually feeds in. So we have here's our liver. The liver is located on the right side of our body, right upper quadrant of the abdomen. Okay. And the liver makes bile. Oh, I don't have green. Okay. Anyway, green would be good because bile is green. So it makes bile and it delivers the bile through ducts. Okay. And then that bile is stored in the gallbladder. Okay. And then when needed, it's dumped into the small intestine. Here's the duodenum here. After the stomach, it's that C-shaped. It feeds right into the duodenum like that. Okay, via a duct. Now there's another structure located here. It sits here. That is the pancreas, and it too feeds its digestive enzymes via a duct into the duodenum also. So this is the pancreas. Okay, and this is the duodenum after the stomach. So the stomach is located here. Actually, it's located here, and it's kind of in back of the the pancreas is in back of the stomach. So the stomach is here. So this is the duodenum, and we have bile, and we have pancreatic enzymes here, all feeding into the beginning of the small intestine. And then we have, the 20 feet to break it down with the enzymes and then to absorb it across the wall. Okay. So these ducts have names. This is called the common bile duct. Okay. And then we have I won't name all the ducts, but these are all named. All right. Let's go back. Let me grab a picture so you can see that. It's kind of the same same thing. Keep it small. All right, see, it's supposed to be green, not blue, green. All right, let's finish with the large intestine. Where's the cecum? I've already kind of shown you that. The appendix is attached to the cecum. And what vestigial structure is attached to the cecum? It's not really that the idea that the appendix does not have a function, that it's vestigial. It's just a kind of remnant of a, evolutionary past. But it's actually believed to be, as I've mentioned, I think, perhaps a lymphatic function. So there might be some white blood cells that are housed there. So this term vestigial, I'm going to put it in, oops, I'm going to put it in quotes here because that idea is changing a lot. Okay. All right, and the four parts of the colon, which we've done, ascending, transverse, descending, sigmoid. Okay, and its function is to absorb water and contain bacteria. So there's a lot of bacteria located in the colon, good bacteria that make stuff for us, makes vitamins for us, vitamin K and some other things. And then the main thing that's absorbed there is not nutrients, but water. Well, water can be a nutrient, but it absorbs water. So, when you think about it, um, if water absorption happens in the colon, okay, if material, the fecal material, moves too slow through the colon, it absorbs all the water and you get constipation. If it moves too quickly, all right, the water is not absorbed, so it comes out as diarrhea, right? So that's why it's important to, eat the right foods to have proper movement, motility through the colon to allow enough water to be absorbed, but not too much. Okay. All right. So things to think about. Let me draw a picture. We got a nice picture there. And there we go. And let's end with some disorders. I've already mentioned peptic ulcers, right? So you should include that in your disorders. But let's talk about some of these other things. The first one is heartburn. Is it really your heart that's burning? No, it's the lower esophagus sometimes can get irritated to the acidic contents of the stomach, and that results in kind of some pain. And so, you want to eat foods that don't produce more acids, and so, but it feels like it's near your heart, so it's not really your heart; it's your esophagus. IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. Okay, so IBS, not really known what causes it. You get diarrhea, you get constipation. The bowel, which is considered like the intestines, large intestines, get irritated, and it could be a nervous system thing because one of the if we go back to our picture of our layers, there's a whole system of nerves. Okay, and the myenteric plexus, the submucosal plexus, there's all these nerves that are associated with the layers. And they call it the enteric nervous system. That is, the brain gut connection is kind of involving these nerves that connect it to the brain. So let's go back here. So you can have problems. that may be considered nervous system thing, but that can affect the bowel. All right, inflammatory bowel disease, IBD. So irritable versus inflammation. So inflammation here is where chronic inflammation can cause damage. So if it's in the colon, ulcerative ulcerative colitis, right? Colon and itis is inflammation of the colon, and it results in ulcers. So peptic ulcers are in the stomach, but these are other ulcers, which is damage to tissues and causing infection. All right, chronic inflammation, damage to superficial layers of the colon, right? The mucosa, maybe submucosa. You get bloody diarrhea, etc. Crohn's disease is a more serious type of IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, and it can affect both small and large intestines, and it can affect all the layers of the wall. All right, so you still get bloody diarrhea, but it goes deeper, and it is more serious. So, how do you control the inflammation in the body? Okay, specifically in the colon. All right, so that's it for the digestive system. A little long, but very interesting, I hope. All right, have a good day, and thanks for watching. See you the next one.